This week's episode takes us to a quiet college town tucked into Eastern Oregon, a place not unfamiliar to me and not unfamiliar to this podcast. LeGrand was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where the biggest stories barely made it past the county line. Nothing ever really happened. But in the fall of 1995, something was happening. Not out in the open, not loud, not obvious. It was happening behind apartment doors, in late night conversations, in the shadows of people who thought they weren't being watched. And for weeks, maybe longer, police had been quietly building a case that would lead them straight to one small apartment on Adams Avenue. You're listening to Twisted Mysteries, and I'm your host, Justin Droke. Now let's jump into today's story. It started with break-ins, not violent, not chaotic, but consistent. Homes, cars, property, items disappearing without a trace. Electronics, cash, personal belongings. Enough to raise concern, but not enough to cause panic. At least, not yet. Investigators began noticing a pattern. The same types of items, the same general areas, and the same quiet precision. This wasn't random. This was organized. And slowly, piece by piece, a network began to emerge. Young people, locals, some connected through work, others through relationships. And eventually, their attention narrowed to one place, an apartment. Inside that apartment lived a 19-year-old woman named Jama Harms. She had recently graduated high school from Lakeview, Oregon, and she had plans. She had a future that, from the outside, looked like it was just beginning. She had moved to LeGrand with hopes of attending college. And while life hasn't gone exactly as she had planned, she was working, building independence, figuring things out. Jama worked hard at a local restaurant in town called Skipper's. To the people who knew her, she was kind, social, easy to be around. But like many people her age, her world overlapped with others, and not all of them on the same path that she was on. People came and went, friends, coworkers, boyfriends, roommates, and unbeknownst to her, some of those connections were drawing attention from law enforcement. On October 26th, 1995, that's when everything seemed to come to a head. Police arrived at the Adams Avenue apartment with a search warrant. This was it. The culmination of weeks of investigation into a local burglary ring. Inside, they found exactly what they had been looking for. Evidence, stolen property, and two people tied directly to those crimes, Jama's boyfriend and her roommate. Both were arrested, taken into custody. Just like that, the case seemed to be closing. The operation had worked. The suspects were in custody. The apartment, once a hub of suspicion, was now quiet, empty, except for one person, Jama. Jama was not taken into custody that night with her roommate and boyfriend. She was not a suspect in the burglary ring at all. She seemed to live her life on the straight and narrow. She knew nothing of the illicit activities that the two were involved in at all. This also shines a light on her character. She was accepting and open, and she filled her heart with the people that she trusted and loved. If this were the end of the story, it would have been routine. Another small town crime, another case solved. But this isn't that story. Because just hours later, that same apartment would become the center of something far darker. That night, Jama stayed behind, alone. The police had come and gone, the arrests had been made, and whatever tension had filled that space earlier seemed to have passed. But sometime between late that night and early the next morning, in the hours of October 27th, someone came back. We don't know exactly when, we don't know exactly why, but we do know this. Jama Harms was attacked inside of her own home. The violence was immediate, personal, brutal. She suffered severe trauma to the head, consistent with a sharp or heavy object. Basically, she was beaten to death. This wasn't random. This wasn't distant. Whoever did this was close enough to look her in the eyes. I would also like to mention, Jama was later found to be 2 months pregnant. The next morning, 2 friends arrived at the apartment. Something felt wrong immediately. The door was slightly open. Inside, they found Jama unresponsive, gone, at just 19 years old. And just like that, what had started as a burglary investigation became a murder case. Police were now dealing with a scene that had already been disturbed hours earlier. Officers had been in and out, evidence had been handled, people had moved through that space, and now they had to reconstruct a timeline that existed somewhere between 2 completely different crimes over the course of the investigation. More than 100 people were interviewed. Dozens of leads were followed. Polygraph tests were conducted, and yet clarity never came. Instead, what investigators found was something far more complicated, a web of relationships, of secrets, of overlapping motives. Because Jama may not have been involved in criminal activity herself, but she was surrounded by people who were. One name surfaced again and again and again. Robert Shane Teeter, a coworker, a friend of her boyfriend, and notably one of the 2 people connected to the discovery of her body. Over time, investigators began to focus on him. Years later, in 2003, he was indicted for Jama's murder. For a moment, it seemed like answers were finally coming, but the case fell apart. Charges were dropped, not because he was cleared, but because there wasn't enough evidence to prove that he had been there and that had done that. But because there wasn't enough evidence to prove it. I have seen this happen in many murder cases. Investigators will often not risk taking a case to court if the evidence is inconclusive. The DNA collected was not sufficient enough to make a positive match to the suspect. However, the district attorney in 2003 did take the case in front of a grand jury. Robert, serving time for unrelated burglary charges, had been discussing Jama's murder and his involvement while he was in prison. 2 other prisoners overheard his discussion and reported it to authorities. The grand jury, however, decided to dismiss the indictment without prejudice, which means that charges could be filed again if further evidence surfaces. As of today, no evidence can positively be linked to anyone in this case. Robert was released from prison after spending decades behind bars for burglary convictions and is now a free man. And that's where things still stand. So what happened that night? Was it connected to the burglary ring? Did someone return to the apartment after the arrests? Was Jama a witness, a liability, or just simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or was it something more personal, a confrontation, a secret, a moment that escalated too far? In the end, the most unsettling part of this case isn't just the violence, it's the timing. Because everything that led up to that night, the investigation, the raid, the arrests, It all feels like the story, like the reason, like the explanation, but it's not. It's just the setup. The real story begins after the police leave. And nearly 30 years later, we're still asking the same question. Who walked back through that door and why? So, was this murder connected to the burglary ring? Did someone return to the apartment after the police raid? Was Jama targeted or just vulnerable at the wrong moment? Why hasn't DNA evidence led to an arrest? The frustrating thing about Jama Harms is how little of her survived the investigation. The case files included evidence, burglaries, polygraphs, but Jama herself almost disappears inside this mystery. The Jama Harms case appears to still fall under the jurisdiction of the Union County Sheriff's Office and the Union County Major Crimes Team. So if there is someone out there that has information connected to Jama Harms' murder, please reach out to the authorities. The Union County Sheriff's Office main line is 541-963-1017. Official website is ucsoregon.gov, and the Union County District Attorney's Office is also publicly listed for victim and case-related inquiries. You can contact the Union County District Attorney's Office at 541-963-1007. Authorities have repeatedly stated over the years that the case remains open, and investigators still believe people in the community may know more than they have shared publicly. The fact that prosecutors attempted charges multiple times, even decades later, suggests that law enforcement never truly stopped working this case. This is truly a sad case. A young woman so full of life and looking for a better future. I really pray that this family can find justice someday. And with that, I'll end the story for today. For episode, photos, and video links, please check out my Instagram at twisted.mysteries. Thank you to everyone for subscribing to my YouTube channel. If you haven't yet, you can find me at Twisted Mysteries 26. I really appreciate your support, and every like, follow, and share helps me out. So thank you. I would also like to mention that sometimes pseudonyms are used to protect the people involved, and some of the events have been dramatized or embellished for entertainment purposes. Resources for today's episode include La Grande Observer, Elkhorn Media Group, East Oregonian, Justice.gov. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay twisted.